About a year ago, I mentioned on a live stream that there is one person on the planet that could possibly talk me into returning to Christianity. Not because I think he has any good arguments for Christianity. I've mentioned responses that he gave me while I was a believer, and they were not good ones. But I bought them. I was like Cindy Lou Who when he was told the fib by the Grinch, who patted her on the head, gave her some water, and sent her to bed. I swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker, not seeing the obvious flaws. No, it isn't because he knows apologetics better or that he has any answers. It's because he has great persuasive power. That alone would not do it, but he has something else that no other Christian leader has: my trust. He was a good pastor, and I had a great deal of respect for him. He tried to reach out to the community and offered a great deal of help to people in need. Now, that help came with strings attached. He expected people to listen to his gospel message. But he also recognized that his church wasn't for everyone. It was Calvinist, and a Calvinist church wasn't for everyone. No, it quite literally is only for the chosen, whoever that might be. I mentioned that in a live stream that I would love a chance to talk to this pastor again as an unbeliever, but I knew he would never come on a live stream. He is a very private person. He has no social media footprint, which is why I will not say his name. I should refer to him by a name, though. It sounds more personal. So for this video, I'll call him Bob. That is not his name. Bob's last name is uncommon, so if you knew Bob's name, you could possibly find him through search pages. I found his current address by looking at tax records, as I knew what county he lived in 12 years ago when we left his church to move to Alabama. When I said that he would never join me on a stream, a viewer suggested that I write him a letter. I did. I put a lot of thought into that letter. I wrote it over a 4-month period. Today, I'm going to share that letter with you and add some concluding thoughts. A letter to my former pastor, one of very few that I respect. Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. I wrote this letter to Bob not because I wanted to become a Christian again. I do not. But because I really do want to follow the truth, wherever that may lead me. Is there any truth to Christianity? If anyone had any, it would have been Bob. If anyone trustworthy could tell me about it, it would be Bob. Bob was the pastor of North Park Community Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Please don't harass the people there. It has been 12 years since I have been there, and the only person in leadership that was even there when I was there is the groundskeeper. If you look for Bob on the website, you will not find him. If you look on their Facebook page, you will not find him. I checked. There are old photos on the Facebook page that go back to the time when he was there, but he isn't in any of the photos. Neither I nor my family are either. The Facebook posts for the church prior to 2017 are gone, possibly because he wanted no presence there. That is around the time that he left. Possibly because he was asked to leave. I have no idea why he was asked to leave. I received a letter from the church informing me that the church had asked him to step down. It didn't indicate why. I asked a couple people I still knew, but most of them had already left the church as well. They also had no idea what was going on. The one person that I asked that was still at the church declined to answer. The church also has a YouTube channel. They didn't have that when I was there. I checked, and it does not have sermons posted from when Bob was there. So do not look for Bob. You will not find him. Unlike Waldo. My letter to Bob. Dear Bob. Obviously, I used his real name, but for you, dear viewers, it's Dear Bob. I've had you on my mind occasionally over the years. I no longer believe in God. I haven't for 6 years now. Having now listened to many former pastors that no longer believe talk about how they learned in seminary that much of what they learned in church was either not accurate or entirely false, I can't help but wonder how much of what you preached you actually believed, and how much of it you said because it was what people wanted to hear or what you were supposed to say. I now have a YouTube channel where I criticize Christian beliefs. I find it amazing that it took so long for me to figure out that what I believed was not only not true, but was logically impossible. My journey to unbelief began when I was reflecting on the conversion of Paul. God allegedly knew what Paul needed to know in order to believe, and gave him just that. Why not everyone? If God knows what everyone needs to know in order to be saved, why not give that to everyone? The Calvinist answer would be that God doesn't want everyone. Side note to my viewers, Bob is a Calvinist, so I covered the Calvinist response first. He intends only to call the chosen few. Only the chosen are called, and only the chosen are given what they need to believe. But this violates the character the Bible claims that God has. God is supposed to be love. Love is kind. Making someone you know will be tortured for eternity, making a vessel of wrath, is not an act of kindness. It is not what a loving being would do. Love does not seek its own. God seeking his own glory is seeking his own. By his own alleged definition, God is not love. To claim to be love and to create billions of people you intend for eternal torture is a violation of the law of non-contradiction. I reasoned my way into the divine hiddenness problem, though I didn't realize that that was what I had done until a year later. I had never heard of this, but of course, this was only the tip of the iceberg. I next discovered that there had never been a global flood, meaning the Bible is not and cannot be the inerrant word of a God. When I made this discovery, I realized that I had known this for a long time. I just didn't realize that I had known it. I knew enough about history to know that China, India, and South America were not settled by Babylonians, which would have to be the case if the flood story were literally true, as the Bible claims that the people at Babel migrated to populate the whole earth. Worse, Neolithic Chinese art is not so different from Chinese art of the alleged post-Diluvian period, such that they are made by distinct cultures of people. Further, the archaeological evidence does not support a single people group repopulating the earth in a post-Diluvian time period. Worse yet, the human genome shows that its most recent common ancestor lived 200,000 years ago, not during a period that could be the alleged flood. Geologists have also traced human migration patterns and human civilization spread out of Africa, not out of the Middle East. Add to that the heat problems and mud problems with the global flood story and the lack of geologic evidence of a global flood, and clearly there has never been a global flood. Geological, biological, and archaeological data points all preclude the possibility of a global flood. There was no global flood. Even the majority of Bible scholars no longer accept a global flood. Most have reinterpreted the Bible to have it mean a large local flood, even though that is clearly not what the text claims. Next, there are historic problems with Jesus' birth narrative, then the inconsistency in the resurrection claims, and the scholarly consensus that many of the books of the New Testament are forgeries. It blew my mind when I heard John Piper in a video say, side note to my viewers, Bob followed Piper intensely. He allowed very few people to preach from his pulpit. If he was on vacation, he usually left us with a recorded sermon from Piper. As church librarian, I bought all of Piper's books for the church library. It blew my mind when I heard John Piper in a video say that in his graduate work he discovered that so much of Bible translation and interpretation is based on guesswork. He asked the question of how he can expect people to base their lives on guesswork. And then he moves on without ever addressing the question that he raised. I made a video about this. Just how does he expect people to think that he has the Word of God when he knows full well that all he has is guesswork? I now realize that there are many different viewpoints on what constitutes Christianity. Biblical inerrancy isn't even a majority viewpoint. William Lane Craig says Genesis 1 to 11 is mythohistory. Mike Licona says the stories about the dead walking around Jerusalem and the tearing of the temple veil at Jesus' death are portents, not historical events. These are more reasonable positions. The lack of any historical account of hundreds of dead people walking around Jerusalem at Passover is strong evidence that it is not a real event. Not to mention that Josephus makes no mention of the temple veil ever having ripped in his Antiquities. So while these are more reasonable positions, they still leave me with no reason to think anything in the Bible is anything more than the ancient writings of people about their religious beliefs. It contains no more truth than the Quran or the Book of Mormon. That is not to say that it is worthless. It is not. It's a great insight into the beliefs of ancient peoples, but it most definitely is not the word of a God. A God that cared about what people believed, that left the book that we call the Bible to tell us about it, would either be an ineffective communicator or a trickster. I am now aghast that I never saw that the Bible could not possibly be inerrant, as it even tells you it is not by the existence of the long ending of Mark. If the Bible were inerrant, which ending would be the inerrant one? And why would a God that cared about what people believe about the Bible allow the long ending, an error and not the word of the alleged God, into his book? I know some believers sidestep the problem by claiming that the Bible is inerrant in the original manuscripts, a convenient claim that is unfalsifiable as we have none of the original manuscripts, a fact I didn't know as a believer. Which, of course, leads to another question. Why would a God that cared about people believing in the Bible allow all of his inspired words to be lost to history, leaving the people he expects to believe in him to guesswork as to what this alleged God wants you to believe? Then, of course, comes the matter of faith. God doesn't reveal what he means or what he wants you to believe because he wants you to have faith. Really? Why was that not required of Paul? Why was he not required to just guess at what God wanted him to believe? Which takes us right back to the beginning, the divine hiddenness problem. I don't expect you to be able to answer these questions. If there were any answers, the apologists would have come up with them by now, rather than trying and failing as they do. In fact, the very existence of apologists is evidence of the hiddenness of God. If there were a God that wanted people to know him and know him well, he shouldn't need apologists to do the job for him, especially not apologists that can't agree with each other as to what it is that this God is supposed to want people to believe. If you are wondering why I did not ask this of my local pastor as my faith was failing me, I did. My pastor had no answers. My prayers were not answered. Books failed to give me any answers. There simply are no answers. No, what I'm wanting from you is the answer to the question as to how you handled the cognitive dissonance. You are an intelligent, educated man. You had to know about many, if not all, of these issues, yet you never preached on them. If preaching really were about equipping the saints for every good work, and not assuring the faithful about what they already believe, this should have been what you talked about. Because this failure is what causes people like me to leave when we find these things out. Was your preaching no more than assuring the faithful that they believed in the right things? Do you still believe? Do you still think the Bible inerrant? Or have you always known that it is not, but preached that it was because you were required to? If this is the case, I feel sorry for you. I feel even sorrier for people that endure sermons by pastors that know that they are untrue as they preach them. Mark, my husband, is still a believer. He still attends church on Sunday, but I think he's happier with me as an unbeliever. He always just wanted to be a pew sitter and never wanted any more involvement. The pandemic gave him the perfect out. Now he just watches a service on his computer and never has to leave the house. The church he attends doesn't even know that he attends. The pastor wouldn't even know his name. Religion is off the table for discussions between us. I think Mark fears that if I talked about why I don't believe, I would convince him, too, that God isn't real. He doesn't want that, so we don't talk about it. I hope you and your family are well. I am interested in knowing if you still believe and how you handled the cognitive dissonance between what you preached and what you learned in seminary. Sincerely, Kelly Pearsall. I sent this letter 2 months ago. I received no response. It's possible he never received the letter. From tax records, I verified that he paid taxes on the house that I sent it to in 2024. So if he moved, it had to have been after January of 2025. It's possible the letter was lost in the mail. It's possible that I am from a time period he doesn't want to think about, possibly because of whatever happened that caused him to be asked to step down, and he simply tossed the letter. Possibly he felt that since he is no longer a pastor, he had no interest in responding to me. Possibly he was simply too busy. Or possibly he simply had no answers and had nothing to say. Or possibly he is giving the letter a great deal of thought and he is still working on his response. If I ever receive a response, I will share it with you, my dear viewers. Live your life.